Long before we learn language, ambition, or fear, there exists within us a silent inheritance. The innate power to imagine beyond limitation, endure the unbearable, love without condition, create from nothing, and transform suffering into wisdom. These are not gifts granted by society. They are the original architecture of the human spirit, yet time has a way of burying what it cannot destroy. With every disappointment, every fear accepted as truth, every distraction mistaken for purpose, and every compromise made for comfort, these inner powers gradually retreat beneath the surface of consciousness. They do not vanish, they simply become forgotten. What was once instinct becomes doubt, what was once clarity becomes confusion, and what was once an unshakable connection to our deepest nature becomes a distant echo beneath the noise of modern life. The oldest mystery schools taught that every person is born with extraordinary God-given powers that slowly fall asleep beneath fear, distraction, and habit. In this journey, you will uncover 7 forgotten powers of human spirit capable of transforming the way you think, endure suffering, create meaning, and leave a legacy, because the greatest discovery is not outside you, it has been waiting within you. Chapter 1: The Art of War and Strategic Vision. The greatest victories are often invisible. One who understands both the circumstances and oneself possesses a tremendous advantage over one driven only by impulse. This insight extends far beyond battlefields. Modern life constantly tempts us to react immediately, to argue before listening, purchase before reflecting, decide before understanding, and speak before observing. The ancient masters warned that haste often disguises insecurity. Wisdom moves differently. Imagine an experienced archer standing before a distant target. A beginner releases the arrow quickly, hoping enthusiasm will compensate for poor aim. The master spends far more time breathing, adjusting posture, feeling the wind, and waiting for complete stillness. The shot appears effortless, but effortless does not mean careless, it means prepared. Strategic vision begins with stepping back. Many of life's greatest mistakes occur because people confuse urgency with importance. Decisions made from fear frequently ignore possibilities visible only through calm observation. Relationships suffer because words outrun understanding. Financial choices become impulsive because anxiety replaces patience. Opportunity disappear because immediate discomfort overshadows long-term purpose. Ancient strategists trained themselves to see beyond the present moment. They ask not merely what solves today's problem, but what future does today's decision quietly create. This is spiritual discipline disguised as practical wisdom. Every choice plants seeds, some blossom quickly, others shape decades. One ancient account tells of a respected governor who faced growing unrest within his province. His advisors urged immediate punishment, believing force would restore order. Instead, the governor traveled quietly among the villages, disguised as an ordinary traveler. For weeks he listened rather than commanded. He discovered that the true problem was not rebellion, but years of neglected justice. When he finally acted, he corrected the deeper cause instead of attacking its symptoms. Peace returned without prolonged conflict. Vision defeated force. The lesson remains timeless. The strongest person is rarely the one who reacts first. It is the one who understands most deeply, before every major decision. The ancient masters would often pause, allowing emotion to settle before judgment emerged. In that quiet space, perception became clearer. Perhaps this is why strategic vision belongs not only to warriors but to anyone seeking a meaningful life. Step back before major decisions. Stillness often reveals what urgency hides. Vision defeats force. Chapter 2: The First Forgotten Power, Awareness. Among all the powers the ancient world sought to cultivate, none was considered more fundamental than awareness. Long before kings were instructed in statecraft and before monks withdrew into forests and mountains, the wisest teachers asked a remarkably simple question: who is paying attention? Everything else they believed depended upon the answer. When Siddhartha Gautama left the palace in search of truth, he was not searching for hidden magic or supernatural abilities. He was searching for understanding. He had witnessed sickness, old age, and death, realities his comfortable upbringing had concealed, and realized that humanity suffers not only because life changes, but because people move through life without truly seeing it. The Dhammapada begins with a profound observation: all that we are is the result of what we have thought. The teaching is not that thoughts magically create the world, but that they quietly shape the world we experience. Attention becomes interpretation. Interpretation becomes action. Repeated action gradually becomes character. The ancients understood something modern psychology continues to confirm. The mind notices what it has been trained to notice. A fearful person discovers danger everywhere. A grateful person discovers unexpected blessings. A resentful heart collects insults. A peaceful mind discovers opportunities where others find only obstacles. The outer world may remain the same. The inner lens changes everything. Imagine 2 travelers walking the same ancient road at sunrise. one notices only the dust beneath his feet, complaining about the long distance ahead. The other notices birds greeting the morning, farmers tending the fields, and the cool breeze carrying the scent of cedar trees. Both walked the same path, both experienced entirely different journeys. Awareness shaped reality long before circumstances did. Modern life, however, makes unconscious living remarkably easy. Days become routines repeated without reflection. Meals are eaten while thinking about tomorrow. Conversations occur while attention drifts elsewhere. Entire years pass with astonishing speed because the mind was never fully present for them. Ancient teachers warned that unconscious habit slowly becomes a second prison. The danger is not merely distraction, it is forgetting that one is distracted. This is why mindfulness traditions never encouraged escaping life. Instead, they encouraged entering life more completely. Washing a bowl became an opportunity for presence. Walking became meditation. Listening became an act of reverence. Even breathing became a reminder that life exists only in this moment. Awareness always begins now. Many imagine awakening as a dramatic event accompanied by extraordinary visions. The ancient masters often described it much differently. Awakening begins the quiet moment you observe your own anger before speaking. It begins when you notice anxiety instead of immediately obeying it. It begins when you recognize an old habit repeating itself and gently choose another response. Nothing changes faster than awareness. Nothing changes more deeply. A teacher once asked his students to carry a bowl filled to the brim with water through a crowded marketplace. Return without spilling a single drop, he instructed. Later they returned successfully. What insults did people shout? The teacher asked. We did not hear them. What merchants tried to sell you their goods? We never noticed. What musicians performed in the square? We saw none of them. The teacher smiled. You protected your attention. That was the lesson. Life constantly competes for the mind. The person who learns where to place attention gradually becomes master of experience instead of its prisoner. Psychologically, awareness creates a space between stimulus and response. In that space lies every possibility for growth. Without awareness, habits govern behavior automatically. With awareness, freedom quietly appears. Observe before changing, see before judging, listen before speaking. The first forgotten power was never extraordinary. It was simply the ability to remain awake while living. There is an old story preserved in Buddhist tradition about a monk who spent years searching for enlightenment in distant monasteries. He crossed mountains, studied under famous teachers, and memorized sacred texts. Yet peace continually escaped him. One evening, exhausted, he stopped beside a still lake. As the wind faded, the water became perfectly calm. Looking into its surface, he realized he was seeing the moon clearly, not because the moon had changed, but because the water had become still. In that silent reflection, he finally understood. Truth had always been present. His restless mind had merely prevented him from seeing it. Chapter 3. The Power of Self-Mastery. If awareness is the doorway to freedom, self-mastery is the path that follows. Among the Roman emperors stood Marcus Aurelius, a man who possessed authority over vast territories stretching across continents. Yet in his private writings, later known as meditations, he rarely celebrated military victories or political achievements. Instead, he repeatedly returned to one conviction: the greatest kingdom a person can govern is the kingdom within. Power over others is temporary. Power over oneself endures. His teacher in this invisible art was not another emperor, but a former slave named Epictetus. Having lived through hardship, humiliation, and physical suffering, Epictetus discovered a freedom no master could confiscate. He taught that some things belong to us and others never will. Our reputation, wealth, health, and circumstances may change without warning, yet our judgments, choices, and responses remain profoundly our own. This distinction became the foundation of emotional sovereignty. Most people believe freedom means doing whatever they desire. The ancients disagreed. To obey every impulse is another form of slavery. Imagine a ship caught in a violent storm. Waves rise against the hull. Thunder echoes across the sea. Winds change direction without warning. The captain cannot command the ocean to become calm, but he can command the helm. The disciplined captain survives not because he controls the storm, but because he governs himself. Within it, human life unfolds much the same way. Loss arrives unexpectedly. Success disappears. People disappoint us. Illness interrupts carefully made plans. The question is never whether storms will come. The question is who will be steering when they do. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself each morning that he would meet difficult, impatient, selfish, and unreasonable people. This was not pessimism, it was preparation. By expecting imperfection, he protected himself from unnecessary outrage. Expectation shapes reaction. Preparation creates peace. Modern psychology echoes this ancient insight. Emotions arise naturally, but behavior remains a choice. Anger itself is not the enemy, becoming anger's servant is. Fear may appear without invitation, yet courage begins when fear no longer dictates our decisions. Respond, do not merely react. One of the greatest forms of self-mastery is learning to pause. A single breath taken before speaking can preserve friendships. A night's reflection before making an important decision can prevent years of regret. The strongest people are rarely those with the loudest voices. They possess the longest patience. Ancient philosophers often compared the undisciplined mind to a city without walls. Every impulse enters freely. Every temptation becomes a ruler. Every opinion gains immediate authority. Such a life feels chaotic because no inner government exists. Discipline is not punishment, it is protection. The more faithfully one governs thoughts, habits, and emotions, the less dependent one becomes upon external circumstances for peace. This was the hidden freedom Epictetus discovered while still living as a slave. Chains confined his body, they never conquered his mind. History preserves an account from the life of Alexander the Great, who once visited the philosopher Diogenes. Alexander commanded armies capable of conquering nations, yet Diogenes owned almost nothing. Standing before the philosopher, Alexander famously offered to grant him any request. Diogenes looked calmly at the world's most powerful ruler and replied, "Please step aside, you are blocking the sunlight." Alexander left deeply astonished. Later he remarked, "If I were not Alexander, I would wish to be Diogenes. One possessed the world, the other possessed himself." The ancients quietly suggested that only one of these achievements can never be taken away. Chapter 4, The Power of Purpose. Among all the hidden powers entrusted to humanity, perhaps none has carried people through greater darkness than the power of purpose. Civilizations have risen and fallen, kingdoms have disappeared beneath sand and sea, and generations have endured famine, exile, war, and loss. Yet throughout history, one mysterious force repeatedly allowed ordinary men and women to endure extraordinary suffering. It was not physical strength, it was not wealth, it was meaning. The ancient Greeks used the word telos to describe an ultimate purpose or highest end toward which everything naturally moves. An acorn carries within itself the purpose of becoming an oak. Rivers move toward the sea. Stars follow their appointed courses across the heavens. Humanity, they believed, was no different. Every life possesses a deeper calling that extends beyond comfort, pleasure, or personal success. To live without purpose was to wander. To discover one's purpose was to awaken. Centuries later, psychiatrist Viktor Frankl arrived at a similar conclusion under circumstances almost impossible to imagine. Having survived one of history's darkest chapters, he observed that those who retained a profound sense of meaning often found an inner strength that exceeded physical limitations. He did not suggest that suffering is desirable or that hardship guarantees wisdom. Rather, he observed something remarkably consistent. When people possess a compelling reason to continue, they frequently discover strength they never believed they possessed. Purpose enlarges endurance. The ancients understood this long before modern psychology gave it language. Imagine 3 laborers carving enormous blocks of stone beneath the scorching sun. A traveler approaches the first and asks, "What are you doing?" The man sighs, "I am breaking rocks." The traveler asks the second, "I am earning enough to feed my family." Finally, he approaches the third worker. The old craftsman pauses, smiles, and replies, "I am helping build a temple that will remind generations they are never alone." All 3 performed identical labor. Only one experienced sacred work, meaning transformed effort. Life continually asks a quiet question that many people overlook. Not how comfortable are you, but what are you living toward? Pleasure alone cannot answer this question. Pleasure rises and falls like the changing weather. Achievement eventually becomes ordinary. Possessions lose their novelty. Even success demands another success to maintain excitement. Purpose behaves differently. It grows stronger with responsibility. A parent who rises before dawn to care for a child understands this. A teacher who continues encouraging discouraged students despite slow progress understands it. An artist laboring for years on work few people initially appreciate understands it. The work may be difficult, yet meaning quietly renews strength. Psychologically, purpose reorganizes attention. Difficulties no longer appear as meaningless interruptions, but as part of a larger journey. The obstacle becomes instruction. Delay becomes preparation. Even disappointment begins revealing hidden lessons rather than permanent defeat. The mountain remains steep. The climb gains significance. Ancient philosophers often described life as an archer, aiming toward a distant target. The arrow's flight depends not only upon strength, but direction. Tremendous energy without purpose scatters itself. Even modest strength guided toward a meaningful aim eventually reaches its destination. Direct multiplies power. Many people spend years asking, "What do I want?" The wiser question may be, "What kind of person am I becoming?" Purpose is rarely discovered through endless thinking alone. It emerges through faithful action. One meaningful decision leads naturally toward another. Character gradually reveals calling. In serving something greater than personal comfort, individuals often discover the very fulfillment they had been seeking. The paradox is ancient. Those who chase happiness directly often lose it. Those who pursue meaningful living frequently find happiness accompanying them quietly. Purpose outlives leisure. There is an old Greek account concerning a sculptor who spent nearly 40 years carving statues for a temple dedicated to wisdom. Many mocked him because few visitors ever asked his name. One apprentice finally questioned why he continued such demanding work without recognition. The old sculptor placed his hand upon unfinished marble and replied, "I do not carve for applause. I carve because every careful strike shapes both the stone and the soul holding the chisel." Generations admired the temple. Few remembered the craftsman's name. Yet his purpose had already fulfilled its work long before history noticed. Chapter 5. The Power of Imagination. If purpose gives life direction, imagination gives it form. Long before architects raised magnificent temples or explorers crossed unknown seas, every great achievement existed first within the unseen landscape of the human mind. The ancients understood that visible reality often begins as invisible vision. Before hands create, the imagination quietly prepares. Plato suggested that beyond the changing world of appearances exists a higher realm of enduring forms, the perfect patterns toward which earthly things continually strive. Whether interpreted literally or symbolically, his insight offers a timeless lesson. Every meaningful creation begins with an idea before it becomes an experience. The unseen precedes the seen. Centuries later, psychologist Carl Jung explored another dimension of imagination. He observed that the human mind naturally communicates through symbols, myths, dreams, and archetypal stories. Heroes, wise elders, forests, mountains, oceans, and journeys appear across cultures because they express realities deeper than ordinary language. They are not merely fantasies, they are maps of transformation. When ancient storytellers described a hero entering a dark cave to retrieve hidden treasure, they were often speaking of the human spirit descending into fear to recover forgotten strength. Dragons represented inner obstacles. Light symbolized understanding. The journey outward mirrored an awakening within. Every myth concealed a mirror. Imagine a master builder standing before an empty field. Others see only open ground. He quietly studies the landscape and already walks through halls that do not yet exist. He hears voices within rooms not yet constructed. He sees sunlight entering windows never built years later. Others admire the completed structure. The builder smiles because he visited it long ago. Vision always arrives first. Modern psychology continues to support this ancient intuition. Athletes mentally rehearse movements before competition. Musicians hear melodies inwardly before performing them. Skilled craftsmen often visualize each step before beginning their work. Imagination prepares the nervous system, clarifies intention, and strengthens confidence for future action. Yet the ancients offered an important warning. Imagination without action becomes escape. Action without imagination becomes routine. Wisdom unites both. Many people unknowingly imagine only what they fear. They rehearse future disappointments, repeat conversations that have never occurred, anticipate rejection before meeting opportunity, and silently strengthen anxiety through constant repetition. The imagination possesses tremendous creative influence regardless of whether its images inspire courage or cultivate fear. Guard your inner pictures, they become tomorrow's habits. One of the greatest gifts of imagination is the ability to envision a future identity greater than present limitation. The person struggling today need not deny present difficulties. Rather, they begin quietly asking, who would I become if wisdom, courage, patience, and compassion guided my life? This question plants seeds that behavior gradually begins to nurture. Identity precedes transformation. The oak already exists within the acorn, so too does the wiser self quietly exist within every human spirit. The ancient mysteries often invited initiates to imagine themselves, not as they appeared to others, but as they might appear once fear, pride, resentment, and confusion had fallen away. Such contemplation was never wishful thinking. It became an act of preparation. Every noble action strengthened the vision until character slowly matched imagination. The future enters the present through repeated choices. There is an enduring story from the workshops of Renaissance master Michelangelo. When asked how he created such breathtaking sculptures from enormous blocks of marble, he famously explained that he simply removed everything that did not belong. The figure already existed within the stone. His task was revelation. Whether literal or embellished through history, the story carries an ancient truth. Greatness is rarely manufactured from nothing. More often, it is uncovered through patient refinement. The hidden masterpiece already waits within the stone. The hidden person already waits within you. Imagination guided by wisdom and disciplined through action becomes not an escape from reality, but one of the greatest forces for transforming it. Chapter 6. The Power of Resilience. There is an ancient truth repeated across civilizations. What survives life's greatest trials rarely emerges unchanged. It emerges transformed. The old masters did not admire those who had never suffered, for such people had not yet discovered the hidden chambers of their own spirit. Instead, they honored those who carried their wounds with wisdom rather than bitterness. The deepest strength is born in difficulty. In Japan, artisans developed an extraordinary practice known as kintsugi, the art of repairing broken pottery with lacquer mixed with powdered gold. To an impatient observer, the cracked vessel appeared ruined beyond repair. Yet the craftsman saw something entirely different. The fractures were not concealed, they were illuminated. What had once been broken became the vessel's greatest beauty. The crack became the crown. This ancient practice offers far more than an artistic technique, it revealed. Philosophy of life. Every disappointment, every failure, every season of grief leaves its mark upon the human heart. Many spend years attempting to hide those marks. Believing strength means appearing untouched by pain. The wiser traditions gently disagreed. Healing does not erase history, it transforms it. Across the ancient world, another symbol appeared again and again, the phoenix. According to legend, when the great bird reached the end of its life, it did not flee from fire. It entered the flames willingly. From its ashes, a new phoenix arose, carrying the memory of its former life, yet possessing renewed strength. Whether history or myth mattered little, its lesson endured. Sometimes what must end is not your life, but your fear, not your future, but your former identity. Every human being eventually encounters fires they never invited. Illness arrives without warning, trusted friendships dissolve, dreams carefully nurtured for decades suddenly collapse. Age quietly changes the body. Loss visits every household sooner or later. The ancient warrior traditions prepared their students for this reality long before battle began. A warrior trained not because conflict was certain every day, but because hardship was inevitable eventually. The disciplined soul became difficult to destroy because it learned to bend without breaking. Strength is flexible, not rigid. The tallest tree often falls during violent storms because it refuses to yield. Nearby bamboo survives because it bends with every powerful wind and rises again when the storm has passed. Nature whispers wisdom continuously psychologically. Resilience is not the absence of emotional pain. It is the remarkable ability to experience suffering without allowing suffering to define identity. Fear may visit, yet it does not become permanent residence. Grief may arrive, yet hope quietly remains beneath it. Failure may interrupt the journey, yet purpose continues guiding each step forward. Pain changes everyone, wisdom chooses how. Many people unknowingly believe that a meaningful life should be free from hardship. The ancients found such an expectation impossible. They understood that gold is refined through intense heat, olive oil emerges only after pressing, and diamonds form beneath unimaginable pressure. Why then should the human spirit mature differently? Difficulty reveals character long before comfort ever can. A blacksmith heating iron inside a blazing furnace does not hate the metal. The fire exists to strengthen it. Blow after blow from the hammer shapes the blade until it possesses resilience impossible to achieve through gentleness alone. Life often works with similar patience. Every disappointment teaches discernment, every betrayal teaches wisdom, every loss deepens compassion, every obstacle quietly asks, who are you becoming? This question matters far more than why is this happening. Resilience grows whenever attention shifts from victimhood toward transformation. Instead of asking how to avoid every hardship, the wiser soul begins asking what each season might reveal that comfort never could. The wound becomes the teacher, the scar becomes the testimony, the fire becomes the forge. History preserves countless examples of ordinary people who discovered extraordinary courage only after life removed every illusion of certainty. Their greatness did not appear despite adversity, it appeared because of it. An old account from the samurai tradition tells of a young swordsman whose master intentionally defeated him every day for months. Frustrated and ashamed, the student eventually begged for easier instruction. The master quietly placed 2 swords upon the floor. One was newly forged, polished to perfection, yet never tested. The other bore countless marks from years of battle. Which would you trust when your life depends upon it? The master asked. The answer required no words. The sword that had survived every trial had become the stronger blade. So too does the human spirit. Chapter 7. The Power of Intuition. There exists a form of knowing that arrives before words, before careful analysis, and often before conscious thought can explain itself. Ancient civilizations recognized this quiet intelligence long before modern psychology began exploring subconscious pattern recognition. They called it wisdom, inner guidance, the still voice, or simply listening. The loud world rarely hears it. Among the oldest books in human history stands the I Ching, the Book of Changes. Rather than offering rigid predictions, it invited seekers to observe the patterns continually unfolding within nature and within themselves. Life, it taught, moves through seasons just as rivers, forests, and skies do. The wise person does not force reality to obey personal desires. They learn to recognize the currents already moving beneath the surface. True guidance begins with observation. Indigenous wisdom traditions carried a similar understanding. Elders often taught that the earth itself speaks continuously, though not through ordinary language. the changing flight of birds, the patience of ancient trees. The rhythm of rivers and the silence before dawn all became teachers for those willing to pay attention. Nature never hurries, yet nothing essential is forgotten. Ancient seers were rarely admired because they possessed magical abilities. More often they had cultivated extraordinary attentiveness. While others rushed toward immediate conclusions, they remained quietly present until deeper understanding emerged. They trusted that clarity often arrives only after the mind becomes still enough to receive it. This is the paradox of intuition. It cannot be chased, it can only be heard. Imagine standing beside a mountain lake after heavy rain. Mud has been stirred from the bottom, leaving the water cloudy and opaque. No matter how intensely you stare into its surface, nothing becomes visible. Now imagine waiting. Gradually the water settles. Without force, clarity returns. The lake reveals what had always been there, so does the mind. Modern life conditions people to believe that every important decision must be made immediately. Endless information creates the illusion that more analysis always produces greater wisdom. Yet many of history's wisest decisions were born not from frantic thinking, but from disciplined stillness. The ancients understood that thought is valuable. Silence is indispensable. Intuition differs from impulse. Impulse demands immediate satisfaction. Intuition carries quiet confidence. Impulse often grows louder when challenged. Intuition remains remarkably calm, needing little persuasion because it arises from deeper integration rather than emotional urgency. Learning this distinction requires patience. One ancient elder explained it beautifully to his grandson while walking through an old cedar forest. "Listen carefully," he said. "I hear nothing," the boy replied. The elder smiled. "Exactly, you are still listening only for noise." As they continued walking, the child gradually noticed leaves moving gently overhead, distant water flowing between rocks, insects hidden beneath fallen branches, and birds calling across the valley. "The forest has been speaking all along," the elder whispered. "You simply had to become quiet enough to hear it." The same principle governs the human spirit. Beneath constant mental conversation lives another kind of intelligence. It remembers lessons long forgotten by conscious thought. It recognizes subtle patterns invisible to hurried attention. It often warns before danger becomes obvious and encourages before opportunity fully appears. Trust grows through practice. The greatest teachers regularly withdrew into solitude, not to escape life, but to hear it more clearly. Mountains, deserts, rivers, and forests became classrooms because silence sharpened perception. Away from distraction, they rediscovered the quiet wisdom that constant activity had concealed. Psychologically, intuition often reflects the remarkable ability of the human mind to integrate countless experiences beneath conscious awareness. Spiritually, many traditions understood it is the soul remembering truths the restless intellect temporarily forgets. Perhaps both perspectives point toward the same mystery. There is an enduring story from the indigenous peoples of North America about an agging tracker renowned for finding lost travelers. When younger hunters asked how he accomplished what seemed impossible, he simply knelt and touched the earth. "The ground tells its story," he said softly. They looked but saw only dirt. He saw broken grass, disturbed stones, bent branches, faint footprints. The direction of the wind and the movement of animals avoiding unfamiliar scents. To others it appeared like intuition. To him it was years of patient attention becoming quiet wisdom. The deepest guidance rarely arrives with thunder. More often it comes like a whisper carried through stillness, and only those who learn to become inwardly silent will recognize its voice. Chapter 8. The Power of Transformation. The oldest mystery schools taught that the greatest miracle was never the changing of metals, but the changing of the human heart. For centuries, alchemy has been misunderstood as the ancient pursuit of turning ordinary lead into pure gold. Countless legends tell of hidden laboratories, secret formulas, and elusive philosopher's stones. Yet those who studied the Hermetic tradition closely understood that the visible symbols concealed a far deeper teaching. The metals represented the human soul itself. Lead was not merely metal. Lead was fear. Lead was ignorance. Lead was resentment, pride, despair, and every heavy burden carried within the human spirit. Gold represented something entirely different. Wisdom, clarity, compassion, unearned freedom. The ancient alchemist was never simply a chemist. He was a student of transformation. Hermetic teachings described the universe as a living process of continual refinement. Nothing remained fixed forever. Seasons changed. Rivers reshaped mountains. Seeds became forests. Children became elders. Even stars were born, matured, and eventually disappeared into eternity. Everything transforms. The question was never whether change would occur. The question was whether it would happen consciously or unconsciously. Many people spend years hoping circumstances will transform their lives. They wait for better opportunities, different relationships, greater wealth, or ideal conditions. Yet Hermetic wisdom quietly reverses the order. Transformation begins within. Everything else follows. Imagine entering an ancient workshop where an old alchemist patiently tends a blazing furnace. A young apprentice watches eagerly, expecting to witness impossible magic. Instead, the master places an ordinary piece of iron into the fire. Nothing spectacular occurs. Finally, the apprentice asks, when will the miracle happen? The master smiles, it already has. The fire is changing both the metal and the one who learns patience. The furnace was always a teacher, so is adversity. Fear itself contains hidden potential. Left untouched, it hardens into limitation. Yet examined with honesty, fear often becomes the doorway to wisdom. Every courageous act throughout history began with someone who felt afraid, but refused to remain imprisoned by that feeling. Courage is transformed fear. Likewise, weakness often becomes unexpected strength. The person who has experienced loneliness learns compassion. The one who has failed repeatedly develops humility. Those who have endured suffering frequently become the gentlest guides for others walking similar paths. The wound becomes wisdom, this ancient understanding echoes throughout modern psychology. Human beings possess remarkable capacity for growth after adversity. Difficult experiences, when met with reflection instead of bitterness, can deepen empathy, strengthen resilience, and clarify purpose. Pain itself is not the teacher. Rafish is the Hermetic masters called this process transmutation, the conscious ability to transform one mental and emotional state into another. Anger need not become violence. Fear need not become paralysis. Envy need not become resentment. Every difficult emotion carries raw energy. Wisdom determines its direction. A river flooding wildly destroys villages. The same river guided wisely nourishes entire civilizations. Human emotion follows similar laws. Many misunderstand transformation because they imagine it happens instantly. Ancient alchemists laughed at such expectations. Gold was never produced overnight. Purification required repeated heating, cooling, refining, and careful observation. So does character. Every day presents another opportunity to transform impatience into understanding, criticism into compassion, disappointment into perseverance, and anxiety into trust. These small victories appear insignificant when viewed individually. Over decades, they create an entirely different person. The greatest alchemy occurs quietly. One choice, one habit, one conversation, one moment of forgiveness. Each becomes another refinement of the soul. This is why the ancient masters never promised shortcuts. They offered disciplines instead. Meditation purified attention. Silence purified speech. Service purified ambition. Gratitude purified scarcity. Every practice removed another layer of unnecessary heaviness until the hidden gold gradually emerged. The treasure was never imported, it was uncovered. History preserves a remarkable account concerning the Persian mystic and alchemist Jabir ibn Hayyan. Often remembered as one of history's greatest students of transformation, when a young scholar eagerly demanded the secret formula for making gold, Jabir reportedly handed him a rough piece of ore and said, "Carry this stone for 1 year. Return only after learning why you wished it to become gold." The student came back many months later. He no longer wanted the formula. During that year, he had discovered that greed, impatience, and fear had been the true impurities requiring refinement. The master smiled. The real alchemy had already begun. Chapter 9. The Power of Character. If transformation is the hidden fire of the soul, character is the lasting shape it leaves behind. Long before titles, wealth, and reputation became measures of success, the ancient sages taught that a person's true greatness could be discovered only when no audience remained. Character revealed itself in private choices, unseen acts of integrity, and quiet moments where convenience invited compromise. Reputation belongs to others. Character belongs to you. Among the greatest teachers of this wisdom stood Confucius, whose influence has guided generations for more than 2,000 years. He rarely spoke about extraordinary achievements. Instead, he emphasized ordinary virtues practiced consistently: honesty, respect, humility, responsibility, and faithfulness in daily conduct. He believed society itself rises or falls according to the character of ordinary people. Nations reflect households. Households reflect individuals. Individuals reflect the habits they quietly repeat. This was leadership from the inside outward. Confucius often described the Junzi, the noble person, not someone born into privilege, but someone who gradually cultivates moral excellence through lifelong refinement. Such a person does not pursue admiration. They pursue integrity. Honor was never measured by applause. It was measured by consistency. Imagine two merchants operating side by side in an ancient marketplace. One becomes wealthy quickly through deception, false weights, and empty promises. The other earns less at first, because every transaction is guided by fairness. Years pass. When famine strikes the city, only one merchant is trusted with the community's remaining resources. Integrity accumulates quietly. Trust remembers everything. Psychologically, character creates remarkable inner stability. A person who consistently acts according to deeply held values experiences less internal conflict. Decisions become clearer because they no longer depend entirely upon changing emotions or public approval. The divided mind exhausts itself. The integrated mind walks steadily. Many spend tremendous energy managing appearances. They carefully construct images for the world while privately carrying anxiety, guilt, or insecurity. Ancient virtue traditions warn that maintaining such division eventually becomes unbearable. Peace begins where pretense ends. Quiet leadership grows from this same foundation. The strongest leaders throughout history often spoke less than others expected. They influenced not through constant commands, but through dependable example. Their presence inspired confidence because their actions repeatedly confirmed their words. Character persuades without shouting. Responsibility forms another pillar of noble living. Ancient teachers insisted that freedom without responsibility inevitably becomes selfishness. Every gift, knowledge, wealth, influence, or talent carries obligations beyond personal advantage. The tree does not eat its own fruit. The river does not drink its own water. Their existence benefits others. Snorts. So should ours. Honor also requires humility. The truly wise rarely feel compelled to prove their wisdom. They remain teachable because they understand that growth never ends. Pride closes the door to learning. Humility keeps it open. Ancient virtue traditions repeatedly emphasize that the smallest actions often reveal the greatest truths. How one treats strangers, how promises are kept, how mistakes are admitted, how success is handled without arrogance. These ordinary moments quietly shape extraordinary lives. Great souls are built daily, not dramatically. Character matures much like an ancient cedar. It does not race toward the sky. Year after year, unseen roots spread deeper beneath the earth until storms that uproot weaker trees become little more than passing winds. Strength grows underground first. Eventually, others begin seeking shelter beneath its branches. History remembers the life of the Chinese statesman Yan Shu, celebrated not merely for political success, but for uncommon integrity. During a severe famine, officials quietly suggested storing additional grain for his own household before shortages worsened. Yan Shu refused. If the people must endure uncertainty, he replied, their governor should not be the first to escape it. His decision brought him no immediate comfort. It earned something greater. Generations remembered his character long after his wealth had vanished and his office had passed to others. His reputation faded into history. His integrity became history. Such is the quiet power of character. It outlives success, it survives failure, and long after names are forgotten, it continues shaping the lives of those who choose to follow its example. Chapter 10. The Power of Strategic Vision. Among all the hidden powers possessed by the human spirit, perhaps none is more misunderstood than the power of patience. Many mistake patience for passivity, waiting, or weakness. Yet the greatest military philosophers of the ancient world taught precisely the opposite. True patience is disciplined awareness. It is the ability to see farther than immediate emotion allows. This was the genius of Sun Tzu. For over 2,000 years, the art of war has been studied not merely by generals, but by rulers, merchants, philosophers, and seekers of wisdom. Although its language speaks of armies and battlefields, its deeper lessons concern the human mind. The greatest victories, Sun Tzu taught, are won long before conflict begins. Victory begins with vision. The inexperienced warrior believes strength alone determines success. The wise strategist knows that position, timing, preparation, and understanding often matter far more than force. An army exhausted by unnecessary battles defeats itself before meeting its enemy. The same is true of life. Many people fight every disagreement, chase every opportunity, answer every criticism, and react to every inconvenience. Their energy becomes scattered among countless small struggles until little remains for what truly matters. Not every battle deserves your strength. Ancient strategy begins with observation. Before moving a single soldier, a wise commander studies the landscape, the weather, the seasons, the morale of his own people, and the intentions of his opponent. He recognizes that rushing blindly into action often creates the very defeat he hoped to avoid. See first, act second. Psychologically, this mirrors one of humanity's greatest challenges. Emotion demands immediate response. Wisdom invites thoughtful delay. Between stimulus and action lies a quiet space where perception can replace impulse. Within that pause lives freedom. Imagine an experienced falcon circling high above a valley. Smaller birds dart frantically from tree to tree, reacting to every movement around them. The falcon appears almost motionless, conserving energy while seeing the entire landscape. When it finally descends, its movement is swift and effortless. Stillness created precision. So too does strategic vision. One of the greatest misunderstandings about strength is the belief that powerful people constantly prove themselves. Ancient masters believed exactly the opposite. Those secure in themselves rarely waste energy displaying superiority. They choose their moments carefully because they understand that every action carries consequences, extending far beyond the present. The strongest move is often restraint. Sun Tzu repeatedly emphasized winning without prolonged struggle. To conquer through wisdom rather than destruction represented the highest form of mastery. This principle reaches far beyond warfare. Arguments avoided through understanding, conflicts resolved through patience, and problems prevented through foresight often accomplish far more than victories won through force. Prevention surpasses repair. Modern psychology increasingly recognizes the value of strategic thinking. Those who regularly pause to consider long-term consequences make decisions less dominated by temporary emotion. They become less reactive, more adaptable, and better equipped to navigate uncertainty. Perspective enlarges possibility. Ancient philosophers often compared life to a game of strategy rather than chance. Every decision subtly changes future opportunities. A single habit practiced faithfully alters character. One conversation handled with wisdom reshapes a relationship. A year of disciplined learning transforms an entire career. Small moves create great destinies. The impatient mind asks, "What can I gain today?" Strategic vision asks, "Who will I become 10 years from now?" This difference changes everything. The mountain climber reaching the summit never obsesses over each individual step. His attention remains upon the direction while trusting each careful movement to carry him upward. Likewise, the person guided by long vision no longer becomes discouraged by temporary setbacks. Every obstacle becomes another part of the larger path. Purpose steadies patience. History preserves a remarkable account from ancient China concerning General Han Xin, one of the greatest military strategists of his age. While still a poor young man, he was publicly humiliated by a local bully who demanded that Hansen crawl beneath his legs or fight to the death. The crowd expected violence. Instead, Hansen quietly lowered himself and crawled beneath the man's legs. Many laughed at his apparent cowardice. Years later, after becoming one of China's greatest generals, people asked why he had accepted such humiliation. He answered, "Simply, had I fought for my pride that day, I would have lost the future prepared for me." He saw beyond the moment. His patience became victory. Such is the hidden power of strategic vision. Those who master tomorrow are rarely enslaved by today. Chapter 11, The Power of Legacy. Every civilization eventually asks the same question. When your footsteps disappear from the earth, what will remain? The ancients understood that human life cannot be measured only by years lived, possessions accumulated, or victories celebrated. These pass away like morning mist beneath the rising sun. The truest measure of a life is found in the invisible influence left within other lives. Legacy outlives existence. Among the reflections recorded by Marcus Aurelius appears a recurring reminder that every emperor, conqueror, philosopher, and artisan eventually returns to the same silence. Fame fades, wealth changes hands, monuments crumble. Even the greatest names slowly disappear beneath the passing centuries. Far from creating despair, this realization offered liberation. If everything temporary eventually passes, then only what is truly meaningful deserves our deepest attention. Live for what remains. Indigenous wisdom traditions express a similar truth through the principle often described as thinking 7 generations ahead. Decisions are judged not merely by immediate benefit, but by the world they leave for children yet unborn. Forests are protected because future hands will gather their fruit. Rivers are honored because unborn families will depend upon their waters. True leadership serves tomorrow. This vision transforms ordinary living. A parent teaching kindness plants seeds that may flourish long after both parent and child are gone. A teacher encouraging one discouraged student unknowingly alters generations. A craftsman creating work with integrity leaves behind more than objects. He leaves an example. Joseph Campbell recognized this timeless pattern while studying myths from cultures across the world. Every great hero begins by seeking personal success or survival, yet the journey reaches fulfillment only when the hero returns bearing wisdom meant to benefit others. The treasure was never meant to be kept. It was meant to be shared. This is the final movement of every meaningful life. Youth often asks, "What can I gain?" Maturity gradually asks, "What can I give?" Psychologically, something remarkable happens when attention shifts from self-centered ambition toward service. Anxiety frequently loosens its grip. Because identity no longer depends entirely upon personal achievement. Life expands beyond private concerns into participation within something larger and more enduring. Purpose becomes contribution. The river does not preserve its water by refusing to flow. It remains alive because it continually gives. Human beings follow similar laws. Influence is another form of legacy often overlooked. We imagine influence belonging only to famous leaders, celebrated thinkers, or powerful rulers. Yet history quietly reveals another reality. Countless unknown individuals have transformed families, communities, and generations simply through consistent compassion, courage, honesty, and wisdom. Character echoes farther than fame. Imagine an elderly gardener planting oak trees whose shade he knows he will never personally enjoy. A traveler asks why he labors so faithfully despite receiving no future reward. The old man smiles gently. "When I was young," he says, "I rested beneath trees planted by hands I never knew." Now it is my turn. This is legacy. It is gratitude becoming responsibility. The ancient masters rarely sought immortality through monuments. They pursued something greater, living so faithfully that truth itself continued through those they influenced. Wisdom became their inheritance. Integrity became their monument. No stone lasts forever. Virtue does. Every conversation, every act of forgiveness, every generous decision, every moment of courage quietly extends beyond itself, like ripples spreading across still water. Our choices continue influencing lives we may never meet. Nothing good is ever wasted. History preserves a beautiful account from the Haudenosaunee Confederacy of North America. Before major decisions, respected elders gathered not to ask what would benefit themselves, but what would strengthen the people long after they had joined their ancestors. One elder reportedly ended every council with the same reminder: we borrow this world from tomorrow. Those words guided forests, villages, families, and generations. Long after the speakers had departed, their wisdom continued shaping lives they would never witness. Such is the greatest hidden power of the human spirit. Not merely to succeed, not merely to survive, but to leave behind a world made wiser, kinder, and more courageous because we once walked through it. That is the legacy no passing century can erase. Chapter 12. The universal pattern shared by every wisdom tradition. Beneath every wisdom tradition lies a remarkably similar understanding of what transforms an ordinary life into an extraordinary one. It is not wealth, it is not power, it is not even knowledge alone. The ancient masters insisted that lasting transformation follows a timeless sequence. Awareness becomes character, character reveals purpose, purpose blossoms into service, everything begins there. The Buddha taught that awakening begins the moment a person truly observes the movements of the mind. Before suffering can end, it must first be seen. The greatest prison is the one whose walls remain invisible. Awareness becomes the first act of liberation. The sages of Greece reached a similar conclusion through a different doorway. Socrates walked the streets of Athens asking questions that unsettled certainty. He believed that an unexamined life gradually drifts into unconscious habit. Before wisdom can be acquired, illusion must be recognized. Confucius approached the same truth from the perspective of society. He believed that harmony in families, governments, and civilizations begins with self-cultivation. One who cannot govern his own conduct cannot wisely influence others. Public order begins in private discipline. Hermetic philosophy expressed the pattern with elegant simplicity. As within, so without, outer life mirrors inner condition. Greek philosophers emphasized virtue. Buddhist teachers emphasized awareness. Hermetic teachers emphasized inner alignment. Confucian scholars emphasized moral cultivation. Different languages, one pattern. Modern psychology has arrived at remarkably similar conclusions. Our repeated thoughts shape habits. Habits slowly become identity. Identity influences behavior. Behavior creates reputation, relationships, opportunities, and ultimately the story we call a life. Character is never created in a single heroic moment. It is accumulated through thousands of unnoticed choices. A person who repeatedly chooses patience gradually becomes patient. One who repeatedly chooses honesty eventually finds truth easier than deception. One who repeatedly chooses courage begins responding differently long before feeling fearless. Identity grows quietly like roots beneath the soil. The ancients understood something many people overlook today. Destiny rarely arrives dramatically. It grows invisibly. Imagine two travelers beginning at the same crossroads. One spends each morning complaining about circumstances, reacting emotionally to every inconvenience, blaming fortune whenever disappointment appears. The other begins each morning with reflection, practices restraint. When anger arises, chooses honesty when dishonesty seems easier, and remains curious rather than defensive. Their lives appear nearly identical during the first weeks, perhaps even the first years, but decades later they inhabit entirely different worlds. Not because fate favored one over the other, because repeated inner choices quietly reshaped perception, relationships, opportunity, and influence. Small choices, extraordinary consequences. This is why every wisdom tradition placed such emphasis on ordinary moments. The greatest battles are rarely fought in public. They are fought within unnoticed decisions. Will I speak with kindness? Will I react or reflect? Will I feed resentment or understanding? Will I pursue appearance or substance? Will I act from fear or from wisdom? History remembers victories. The soul remembers choices. Purpose naturally emerges after character matures. Many people search desperately for purpose as though it were hidden somewhere beyond the horizon. Ancient teachers suggested something different. Purpose is usually discovered while faithfully developing character. The physician heals because compassion matured. The teacher inspires because wisdom matured. The craftsman creates beauty because discipline matured. Purpose is often character finding its proper expression. Service becomes the final flowering. The Buddha spent decades teaching after awakening. Confucius traveled tirelessly despite repeated rejection. Socrates accepted death rather than betray truth. Greatest teachers did not cultivate themselves merely for personal peace. Their inner transformation overflowed into the lives of others. A river does not drink its own water. A tree does not eat its own fruit. The deepest wisdom eventually becomes generosity. This may explain why ancient civilizations judged greatness differently than modern society often does. Today, success is frequently measured by accumulation. Ancient cultures more often measured contribution. Not merely what have you gained, but who became stronger because. This subtle shift changes everything. When purpose becomes service, achievement no longer depends entirely upon recognition. One quiet act of integrity may influence generations. One courageous decision may alter an entire family. One compassionate conversation may redirect another person's life forever. Invisible victories often become history's greatest gifts. The hidden architecture of a meaningful life has always been remarkably simple. See clearly, live wisely, read generously. Everything else follows. The traditions differ, the pattern remains. The path is ancient because human nature has never fundamentally changed. Fear still competes with courage, comfort still competes with growth, ego still competes with humility. The battlefield simply wears modern clothing. Every sunrise quietly asks the same question it asked thousands of years ago. Who will govern your life today, circumstance or character? The answer shapes far more than the day ahead. It shapes the person you are becoming, long ago. Travelers crossing the Silk Road often stopped at a small mountain monastery where an elderly teacher welcomed strangers without asking their names or occupations. Instead, he posed a single question. What have you strengthened within yourself during your journey? Merchants proudly displayed precious fabrics. Soldiers spoke of battles won. Officials described honors received from distant kingdoms. The old teacher smiled kindly but remained silent. One evening, a weathered traveler arrived carrying almost nothing. His clothes were worn and his sandals nearly destroyed by years of walking. The teacher asked the familiar question. The traveler lowered his eyes before answering. I have learned to be less impatient. The teacher nodded. And what else? I complain less than I once did. The teacher waited. The traveler continued softly. I judge others less quickly. I listen more carefully. I forgive sooner. I fear uncertainty less. I have discovered that changing myself is harder than crossing deserts. For the first time that evening, the old teacher stood and bowed deeply. Then he said, You have traveled farther than any road can measure. For every wisdom tradition eventually arrives at the same destination. The greatest journey is never across the earth. It is across the landscape of the human soul. Chapter 13. The real battle is within. Every generation believes its greatest enemies exist outside itself. Ancient civilizations feared invading armies. Kingdoms built walls against foe. Nations, empires spent fortunes forging stronger weapons. Yet the oldest wisdom traditions quietly whispered a startling truth. The most dangerous enemy rarely approaches from beyond the gates. It awakens within them. Long before kingdoms collapse from invasion, many first collapse from arrogance, greed, fear, division, and forgetfulness. History repeatedly confirms what philosophy has long taught. External defeat often begins with internal disorder. The battlefield within determines the battles without. The Greeks understood this through the language of virtue. The Buddhists described it through attachment and ignorance. Hermetic philosophers spoke of mental mastery. Confucian teachers emphasized moral discipline. Different words, one struggle, the conflict between the lower impulses and the higher self. Every morning, humanity awakens onto an invisible battlefield. Fear invites retreat. Wisdom invites courage. Comfort whispers, stay where you are. Growth quietly replies, become who you can be. Few hear the second voice because the first speaks louder. The ego possesses remarkable skill. It constantly seeks certainty, recognition, superiority, and control. It fears correction. It resists humility. It prefers appearance over substance. The ego builds prisons while convincing their prisoners they are free. Wisdom behaves differently. Wisdom listens before speaking, questions before judging, learns before declaring, serves before demanding. Strength without humility becomes domination. Knowledge without humility becomes arrogance. Successes without humility becomes isolation. Ancient teachers therefore treated humility not as weakness but as protection. The strongest tree bends with the storm. The rigid branch breaks. Fear creates another battlefield. Fear often disguises itself as practicality. It tells us not to begin because failure is possible. Not to forgive because pain might return, not to love because loss remains inevitable. Fear promises safety while quietly stealing possibility. Courage does not eliminate fear, it simply refuses to surrender leadership to it. That distinction changes lives. Many assume courage belongs only to warriors. Ancient traditions expanded its meaning. Sometimes courage means speaking truth, sometimes remaining silent, sometimes apologizing, sometimes walking away, sometimes beginning again after repeated disappointment. Yonder victories rarely attract applause, yet they alter destinies. Comfort wages its own quiet war. Comfort itself is not the enemy. Permanent attachment to comfort becomes 1. Growth demands voluntary discomfort. Every meaningful skill requires awkward beginnings. Every meaningful relationship requires vulnerability. Every meaningful purpose requires sacrifice. Seeds break before becoming forests. Clay submits before becoming pottery. Metal enters fire before becoming a sword. Transformation always carries inconvenience. Ancient initiates deliberately accepted disciplined practices not because suffering possessed magical power, but because voluntary difficulty strengthened the will. The person who cannot endure small discomforts becomes easily controlled by large circumstances. Discipline expands freedom. Indulgence gradually narrows it. This explains why so many traditions valued fasting, silence, solitude, reflection, pilgrimage, or meditation. These practices were not punishments. They were training grounds, places where the inner ruler quietly learned to govern the kingdom of the self. Modern life often offers constant distraction. Ancient life demanded constant awareness. Perhaps today's greatest luxury is uninterrupted attention. The person who governs attention eventually governs emotion. The one who governs emotion gradually governs action. Repeated action becomes destiny. This invisible sequence unfolds every day. Another hidden opponent appears wearing a pleasant disguise. Comparison. Ancient philosophers rarely encouraged comparing one's path with another's. Each soul carries different circumstances, different strengths, different responsibilities. The oak does not envy the cedar. The river does not imitate the mountain. Nature flourishes through faithful expression rather than imitation. The human spirit does the same. Comparison quietly replaces gratitude. Gratitude restores perspective. When gratitude returns, peace often follows. The greatest spiritual warfare, therefore, is astonishingly ordinary. Choosing patience over irritation, understanding over judgment, discipline over impulse, hope over despair, presence over distraction, truth over convenience. No audience applauds these victories, yet civilization quietly depends upon them, for societies become reflections of the individuals composing them. The war within eventually becomes the world without. When the first, the second becomes far easier. The ancient teachers were never inviting humanity to escape the world. They invited humanity to transform the one place from which every decision emerges. The human heart, every sunrise begins another campaign. Not against neighbors, not against strangers, not against circumstances, against forgetfulness, against fear, against the temptation to surrender your highest nature for immediate comfort. The battle never truly ends, neither does the opportunity to win it. Ancient records tell of a respected general who, after decades of military victories, sought counsel from a hermit living high in the mountains. The general proudly listed every kingdom he had defeated. When he finished, the old hermit asked quietly, "And how many times have you defeated anger?" The general remained silent. The hermit continued, "How often has pride surrendered before humility?" Again silence. "And tell me, when fear entered your heart, who won?" The warrior slowly lowered his head. For the first time in his celebrated career, he realized he had conquered countless enemies while remaining uncertain whether he had mastered himself. The hermit smiled gently. The greatest commanders first learned to govern the kingdom within. Every other victory is temporary. The general descended the mountain carrying no new weapon, no secret strategy, and no hidden map. He carried something far more difficult, a new battlefield, one that existed entirely within himself. Chapter 14. Awakening the Forgotten Human Spirit. Throughout this journey, we have uncovered 7 hidden powers that the ancients believed were placed within every human being. They were never presented as isolated abilities or mystical gifts, reserved for a chosen few. They were understood as living forces that strengthen one another. Much like the strands of a rope become far stronger when woven together, awareness awakens perception. Purpose gives direction. Imagination reveals possibility. Resilience transforms suffering. Character creates trust. Strategic vision guides action. Legacy gives every step enduring meaning. Together they form what the ancient masters simply called the awakened life. These powers have always existed. What changes is whether we remember them. Modern life often scatters attention in countless directions. Every hour demands reaction. Every notification competes for awareness. Every distraction quietly fragments the mind, until many people no longer remember what silence feels like. A distracted mind forgets its own strength. The ancient schools understood this danger long before the modern world existed. Whether in the temples of Egypt, the forests where Buddhist monks meditated, the mountains where tourist sages lived, or the mines of Greece, students first learned one lesson before any higher teaching was given: become still. Not because silence itself possesses magical power, but because the deepest truths cannot be heard while the mind continually argues with itself. Still water reflects the sky. A still mind reflects wisdom. Meditation was therefore never an escape from reality. It was a return to reality. It invited people to witness thoughts without becoming enslaved by them. Anger could be observed before becoming speech. Fear could be recognized before becoming surrender. Desire could be examined before becoming obsession. Awareness creates choice. Without awareness, habit governs life. Ramvian became the second daily discipline. Ancient philosophers frequently ended each day by asking simple questions. What did I learn today? Where did fear guide my decisions? Where did wisdom quietly appear? What kind of person am I becoming? These questions were not designed to create guilt. They cultivated clarity. The examined day slowly becomes the examined life. Gratitude formed another essential practice. Modern culture often treats gratitude as pleasant optimism. Ancient teachers regarded it as disciplined perception. Gratitude trains the mind to recognize abundance that constant desire overlooks. The grateful person notices opportunities invisible to the perpetually dissatisfied. Attention changes experience. A single sunrise, a faithful friend, a healthy body, an unexpected kindness. These ordinary gifts quietly become extraordinary when fully seen. Gratitude enlarges life. Courage naturally follows. The awakened spirit eventually recognizes that fear never completely disappears. Every meaningful purpose requires walking beside uncertainty. Ancient heroes were not fearless people. They were people who refused to allow fear to become their master. Every act of courage strengthens the soul, even small acts. Speaking honestly, forgiving someone, beginning again, keeping a difficult promise, choosing integrity when compromise seems easier. These quiet victories gradually reshape character. Dorfus completes the circle. Many seek awakening only for personal peace, personal success, or personal happiness. Ancient wisdom consistently pointed beyond the self. The fully awakened person naturally begins asking a different question. How may my life become useful? The river fulfills its purpose by flowing outward. The tree fulfills its purpose by offering fruit and shade. The human spirit fulfills itself through contribution. Meaning grows through generosity. This explains why history remembers those who served more deeply than those who merely accumulated. Wealth disappears, titles fade, influence rooted in compassion continues unfolding long after its source has departed. The awakened spirit never belongs solely to itself. It becomes nourishment for others. These daily disciplines appear remarkably ordinary. Meditation, reation, silence, gratitude, courage, Dorvis. Yet the ancients understood an astonishing truth. Great souls are built through ordinary practices, repeated faithfully across extraordinary lengths of time. Transformation rarely announces itself. It grows quietly beneath the surface like roots strengthening a tree before branches ever reach toward the heavens. The hidden powers become visible only after patient cultivation. One day the fearful person notices unexpected courage. The impatient become calm. The anxious become steady. The distracted become present. The self-centered begin living for something larger than themselves. Others call it change. The ancients called it remembrance. History preserves a beautiful account from the temples of ancient Egypt. Before a young initiate was permitted to receive advanced instruction, he was given a surprisingly simple assignment. For 40 days he was told to rise before sunrise. Sit in complete silence, observe his thoughts without judgment, perform one anonymous act of kindness each day, and each evening write down 3 blessings he had previously overlooked. When he returned, he eagerly asked the high priest for the temple's greatest secret. The old master smiled and replied, "You have already begun practicing it." The initiate looked confused, "But I learned no hidden words, I discovered no sacred symbols." The priest gently answered, "You learn to govern yourself, and that is the doorway through which every greater mystery must first pass." Chapter 15. Final Revelation. You were never powerless. Every civilization leaves behind monuments. Some carve wisdom into stone, others preserve it in scrolls, poems, or sacred stories. Yet beneath every surviving tradition lies one astonishing message that humanity seems destined to forget and destined to rediscover. You were never powerless. Not because life obeys every wish, not because suffering can always be avoided, not because circumstances bend perfectly to desire. It because the greatest source of human strength has never depended entirely upon circumstance. It has always lived within consciousness itself. The hidden powers explored throughout these pages were never inventions of philosophers. They were observations gathered across centuries by people who studied the human condition with extraordinary patience. They watched kingdoms rise and collapse, empires flourish and disappear. Generations repeat the same fears beneath different names. They discovered that although history constantly changes, the human soul continues asking the same questions. Who am I? Why am I here? How should I live? What gives life meaning? Every tradition offered different symbols, yet their answers quietly converged. The power you seek outwardly first awakens inwardly. Modern life often persuades us otherwise. We are encouraged to believe fulfillment lies one achievement away, one possession away, one promotion away, one recognition away. The horizon continually retreats. Satisfaction remains postponed. The ancients recognized this endless pursuit. They warned that distraction is not merely losing attention. It is forgetting oneself. The forgotten powers never disappeared. They simply became buried beneath noise, beneath fear, beneath comparison, beneath constant urgency. Like a spring hidden beneath layers of stone, the source remained untouched, only forgotten. Return is therefore more important than acquisition. You do not create awareness, you remember it. You do not manufacture courage, you uncover it. You do not invent purpose, you gradually recognize the calling that has patiently waited beneath distraction. The journey has always been inward. This is why the hero's journey found across countless ancient myths ends where it began. The hero leaves home searching for treasure, wisdom, or victory. After countless trials, he returns transformed, discovering that the greatest treasure was never merely external. The greatest discovery was the person he became. The journey changes the traveler, so does life. Every disappointment can deepen compassion, every challenge can strengthen resilience, every uncertainty can cultivate trust, every failure can become instruction. Nothing is wasted when awareness remains present. Even suffering can become a teacher. This is the profound optimism shared by the ancient masters. Not the optimism that denies hardship, the optimism that recognizes humanity's astonishing capacity to transform hardship into wisdom. You are stronger than fear suggests, wiser than doubt admits, more resilient than failure can measure, more capable of love than anger believes. The hidden powers have quietly accompanied you from the beginning, waiting patiently for your attention. Living consciously, therefore, becomes the final initiation. It is not achieved through extraordinary visions or mysterious ceremonies. It appears each morning in ordinary choices. Will I live awake today? Will I choose wisdom over impulse, gratitude over complaint, service over selfishness, reflection over distraction, courage over comfort? These decisions slowly determine the quality of an entire lifetime. The ancient masters never asked for perfection, only remembrance. On and again until wisdom becomes natural, until character becomes effortless, until kindness becomes instinct, until the hidden powers no longer feel hidden at all. Perhaps the greatest revelation is also the simplest. Humanity has searched endlessly for secret knowledge, while overlooking the greatest mystery already living within every conscious heart. The kingdom was never elsewhere. The light was never extinguished. The path was never closed, only forgotten. And forgotten things can always be remembered. History tells of an aging traveler who spent decades crossing kingdoms, searching for a legendary temple said to contain the greatest wisdom on earth. After a lifetime of wandering, he finally reached a mountain sanctuary where an elderly guardian welcomed him inside. Exhausted, the traveler asked, "Tell me the final secret." "I have crossed deserts, oceans, and mountains to find it." The guardian handed him a polished bronze mirror. The traveler stared into his own reflection, confused. "There is nothing here except myself." The old guardian smiled gently. "Exactly. The greatest journey was never across the world. It was across the distance between the person you believed yourself to be and the person you were created to become." The traveler wept, not because he had reached the end of the road, but because he finally understood that the wisdom he had pursued across continents had quietly accompanied him every step of the way. The hidden powers had never abandoned him. He had simply forgotten where to look. And perhaps that is the final invitation these ancient voices still offer every generation. Awaken, remember, live consciously, for the greatest power you will ever discover is not hidden in the world. It is hidden in the awakened human spirit.